So this is Bam Electric Ghost, and it's Sunday morning, and we're getting ready to record some expansive sound. But if you want to get into the Ghost, you can go to www.bamelectricghost.com. I'm Keith Gettin Jones, producer, musician, synth sound designer, podcaster behind Bam Electric Ghost, which is my vehicle for doing all things expansive sound. And expansive sound is a way of expressing myself through stream of consciousness, kind of DAW-less recording, being able to mix genres, and having the freedom to not have to stay in a lane in terms of type of music. And so we're excited that we actually developed our website a couple years ago, and we learned how to use some tools. And there's a cool tool out there called Foundy. You can build landing pages, you can shorten your links, and if you actually got a landing page for Peg Forever, which is our latest album, on bamelectricghost.com. So if you go out there, you can find out all the different places where it's streaming, or where you can buy it. So that's kind of cool. And we're going to do some work today on our Akai Force. And the Akai Force is a really interesting song tool, because a lot of years we try to stay away from a DAW, because a DAW is a really powerful tool, but we have some issues with the way it has musicians kind of trying to make everything perfect. So a DAW is a digital audio workstation. And Akai is a famous Japanese manufacturer that created these groove boxes called MPCs. And a lot of hip-hop artists are famous for using MPCs. A couple of years ago, they came out with a new device called a Force. And the cool thing about a Force is it has some of the capabilities of an MPC, but it's gone really on steroids. It's got like a 64-pad matrix that allows you to play in multiple ways. So if I actually go on it right now and I load like an instrument, like a bass, right, and I load that bass line, and then I go into the matrix on it and I want to look at the different types of chords I can do a thing called tonets. I can do a guitar arrangement, I can do a bass guitar arrangement, I can do it as a piano type of arrangement on the pads, chromatic, different types of scales. I can harmonize it, and I can do chords, and I can do progressions. So it gives you all different styles on this 64 pad matrix that allows you to play all those different types of things, like chords or bass, or play like a piano, where you can actually play full chords. So it gives you a way to actually not just input notes into a matrix, but actually play the notes with this really advanced matrix that's bigger than some previous machines. MPCs have a lot of pads, but they don't have 64. And also what it does is allows you to play outside of what a piano could do, because you can mix scales, you can mix ranges, which gives you a lot of power. And the other thing about it that's not like a DAW is it doesn't need a computer. All the software inside of it can load like synth models, and within it, when you go into the system and you go to do plugins, it basically has plugins, kind of like a DAW. And within the instruments that I have, it has a bass line instrument, has a drum synth, it has an electric instrument that has tons of electric pianos and all kinds of electric instruments, a thing called a hype synth. And then we downloaded a Mellotron, which is a famous tape-based analog synth from the 70s, late 60s. You can hear it on Abbey Road. There's an ARP Odyssey, there's a Selena, and then there's a tube synth, which is like an analog synth. So all these different synth models are loaded, and you can use them in a clip-based matrix that has like 8 lanes or 8 rows. And when you build each row, you can control in every plug-in that you bring in, you can set how many beats you're going to do. So for this example, this morning we created one line so far, and each plugin has 24 beats on the measure. We've created like 24 beats up to a length of 24. You can do it however long you want. But we've kind of run into, like, some people like to just do 8 or 16. We do 24. Gives us a little more room to do stuff. And then what happens is that you can compose, line by line, and then eventually go into a thing called arranger mode. And once you're in arranger mode, you can actually mix the rows. So let's say you have 8 clips, and the first clip is the intro, and the second clip is like the melody, and the third clip is like a drum fill, and then the fourth clip is a variation of the melody, and then you go back and you can bring back the melody, and you can create another fill. You can create an outro. And so you could then have all these lanes and go, I'm going to take one and do one for 5 bars, and then I'm going to go do 2 for 10 bars, and then go back to 3, and then go back to 4, and go 1. You can just bounce it around. And so in arranger mode, you have total freedom to kind of take your clips and move them around, and then put that in it. Because it's arranger mode, it basically creates a song. It takes all your clips and then it puts them into a song. So that is a little different than in the MPC and other DJ type of equipment. It actually allows you to build the song. And so it's very dynamic. And while you're running in arranger mode, the pads are active. So then you could actually freeform play like a Mellotron flute over something you already did. And to that can come in. You can actually add a couple drum lines in to create a fill in the middle of it. You could bring samples in. You can bring audio samples in. You can have an outside external MIDI instrument. Like right now we have a JD08 hooked up through MIDI, and when we're in arranger mode, we can actually bring that in. And then the other thing we do is to have total flexibility, because we found it doesn't let us really record vocals. We can do samples. Not that we can't do the vocal as a sample, but to be able to sing a vocal for the whole length of the song, our solution is to use arranger mode, put it in arranger mode, and then we've got a Zoom Live Track L8 multi-track recorder. And so what we do is we output the arranger mode, and there's a cool thing on the Akai Force is it has a mixer. So every lane or every plug-in, every lane is actually in the mixer. And so you have the 8 lanes can all be controlled. So if you have a MIDI instrument on lane 1, you have a drum on lane 4, you have plugins on 5 and 6, and another drum on 7, a sample on 8. All those can be mixed, and the mix can be panned. You can have sends, you have internal send effects. You can have so that just gives you a lot of capability. So all that can be leveled out before you send it out. So then once we have it leveled out and mixed on the Akai Force, we'll then send it to a zoomed live track L8 as an output, because this thing can output 1/4-inch line. So we got 1/4-inch lines going out, coming into a Zoom live track mixer. So line 1 to line 2 are going to track 1 and 2 on a live track multi-track. Then we actually go and track that. And once we track that, then we've got a really interesting capability to put it into the multi-track recorder, which gives us no restrictions on what we want to do for overdubs, because there's no compression. This is just doing straight tracking. So in that way, what we do is once we got to track down all the tracks coming off of the Akai Force, we'll go and open it up and do a vocal track. So the thing about the Zoom L8 is the line in tracks are coming into track 7 and 8, and so tracks 7 and 8 are where my Akai Forces are coming in, and then it's open up to 1 through 6 are open. So I do track 1 and 2 as a vocal. And I'll use a 512 audio mic going into the L8, and it's got the ability to give me phantom power, and then I have the ability to apply effects. And the cool thing about the live track, it has like a hall effects, it has room effects, there's plate effects, delay effects, chorus effects, and vocal effects. So I can go and apply those effects. And what I tend to do is I don't apply them when it first comes in. I wait till I get to the mastering mode. And when I go into mastering mode, it allows me to shift effects for different parts of the song. So I'll maybe have a chorus effect, in the first part of a vocal, and if there's a word I want to emphasize, I don't hit the delay effect to emphasize that word and have it delay, where I'll go and repeat it, or I'll use a plate effect to kind of have this kind of weird decay on the vocal, and I kind of bounce around. When I'm doing my mastering, I'll bounce around the effects and apply effects to emphasize certain words or certain phrases in certain parts of the song. So it gives me like a live way to mix. So I'm actually live mixing my effects onto the vocal. So I put the vocal down, and then when I go to master, I actually live record the effects when I'm mastering. And so what I've done is I've taken an Akai Force and tracked everything on the Akai Force. If something's wrong with any of that, I can go back in the Akai Force and fix it, and then bring it back into track 7 and 8. And actually re-record those. So I have my original is sitting on my Akai Force, but I bring it into the LA so I can then put a vocal in. And what this DAW allows me to do is still have a very free-form way of using tools that a lot of people wouldn't do it so free-form. They would be a lot tighter with it, and I like being a lot looser with it. So I found a way to do what I do with my R20, because I have an R20 from Zoom, and I've got that hooked up to hardware synths like Moogs and Rolands and Arturias. And in that part of my studio, everything's just going off of keyboards and going into a mixer and being really live recorded in a real kind of stream of consciousness way, or hardware recording, multi-track way. But I have been able to kind of bounce into the modern world eclipse with this Akai Force, which gives me a varied way of playing and a way to kind of match some of the style of the music today with still keeping my randomness that I like. Because I've got the kind of tight construction you can do with a clip-based Ableton type of workflow, but then I purposely make it a little bit looser so I can actually have what I call the expansive sound elements coming in. Like I could bring a Moog into my Akai Force workflow. I could bring a JD08. I could bring a Teenage Engineering OPZ. I could bring, anything I want to bring. It allows me to bring other instruments in, so I can bring that kind of random factor of, random voltage or LFO kind of craziness. So bring some of the techniques I like to do with my analog instruments, is letting the analog instruments kind of dictate what I'm going to do. And I kind of feel like that's the ghost in the machine. That's the muse. And, part of the reason I call myself Fan Electric Ghost is the idea that, synthesizers are electric. Electric guitars are electric, but synthesizers have this kind of strange ability that we actually use what's called controlled voltage. On analog synths, we can actually take the voltage coming from every part of the synth in a process called subtractive synthesis or additive synthesis. So subtractive synthesis, you basically take a waveform and you keep on taking away from it by playing with the frequency, playing with the pulse width, playing with the cutoff, playing with the resonance, playing with the modulation amounts, playing with the low frequency oscillator and the gate length, the attack, the decay, all those things. So you can play with all that and either have a bass sound that's really boomy, or you start to pull it out so you almost don't hear it, or you can bring things in where there's a lot of distortion, or there's not a lot of distortion, or there are harmonics, or there's less harmonics. And so you go and develop a sound to try to recreate something that might be a real instrument, like a bass. Is like we're trying to recreate what we think of bass, like a Fender bass, but it's actually going to sound like a Moog bass because it's a Moog. And then you can create all kinds of things from like toms and kick drums to strange lead sounds that are kind of like science fiction, weird kind of horror movie type stuff, like theremin type things. So you just have a lot of power with these synths, and because you have this ability, kind of like an old telephone operator. If you've ever seen analog synths, modular ones specifically, they have these patch bays. They kind of look like how the telephone operators used to take wires and plug them into different things. What happens is on these analog synths with these patch bays is you can take the workflow and have it override something. So if it's going left to right, you can take something at the end of the workflow and push it to the beginning. Take something from the middle and put it to the end. You can just bounce it around. You can actually totally break the rules of how the thing was working. If it was looking left to right, you can start doing right to left. Or if it was going up and down, you do down to up. Inside out. And so what it does is it kind of totally changes the game in terms of your sound design. You're not necessarily doing things linear anymore. You can kind of do things like logarithmic or exponential or all kinds of interesting variations. You can go do negative. We have the ability to do negative polarity. We can do positive and negative polarity. We can do high pass and low pass filters. And what's cool about that is you can really turn things inside out. And as a sound designer, you're trying to make something people haven't heard before. And these machines, because they play where they actually create from the sound wave. We're taking a square wave and pulling the harmonics and the subharmonics and all kinds of stuff out of it to make it turn into something we want to hear or we think is interesting. And that's a large part of why we call ourselves Expansive Sound Experiments, because we have sound tools that are very scientific in their design. They were created by Robert Moog, or they were influenced by a guy named Buchla, who is the guy who invented additive synthesis. So again, I told you, Robert Moog created the Moog synthesizers in the 50s, and they used the subtractive synthesis principle. And then Buchla in San Francisco, he created additive synthesis, and his famous synthesizer is called the Easel, and it was built in like a suitcase. So it was a suitcase kind of synth, and it had a touch capacitor keyboard shaped like an eagle. It didn't even look like a normal keyboard. It was shaped like an eagle. So he was really trying to prove that you didn't necessarily have to follow the piano format. And the original Moogs were the same way. They didn't have keyboards. They just had sequencers. And then later they threw the keyboards in. And then they created the mini Moog and definitely had a keyboard. But the beginning of the Moog and the beginning of the Easel, they're both kind of the same. They're doing alternative input, which allows you to kind of think of music in different terms than what most musicians looked at. And when synthesizers showed up, a lot of musicians were like, those aren't real. Machines can't make music. Well, a piano's a machine. So you could argue that, but it's okay, fine. You don't think it is. But a lot of people didn't like them. They thought they were artificial, thought there was no good use of them. But then, jump to today, and people really are enamored with the first Moogs from the 50s and the ones from the 60s and 70s and 80s, because they all have character. There's all reasons to have each one is unique. And once these analog synths came from not only Moog, but Roland with their Jupiters and Junos, and sequential circuits with their Prophet 5, and Oberheim with the OBA. And Oberheim is known for the most famous sound coming off an Oberheim is Eddie Van Halen's Jump chord progression. And you really can know that. And another core synthesizer I mention all the time is Yamaha's GX1 Dream Machine, which actually was used on the song Saturn on songs in the Key of Life. And that's a polyphonic synthesizer that was a crazy synthesizer. It's three levels, polyphonic aftertouch that was very extreme. It actually could wiggle the keys. So that divergent is an idea within synthesizers. And in the 70s, it was explored. There's this concept called polyphonic aftertouch, which allowed you to have a keyboard that not just had up and down movement, but you could wiggle the keys from side to side, had pressure sensitivity. So you had multiple inputs. Like, so you could wiggle it to give like a vibrato type of thing. You could put pressure on it to make it louder or softer. And, you could shake it. It had a lot of capability to pull in lots of inputs. And so you had all these dynamics that just on the key, you could almost bend the note by wiggling the note. And so that gave you a lot of, depending on the sound you're on, you have all these various dynamics as a player that makes it feel like you're on a Stradivarius violin or something, because you're able to you ever see a violinist, they kind of shake their finger when doing a vibrato on the strings. So it gave a keyboard player that kind of capability, but it was very expensive to implement. It was on the GX1. It was like a $300,000 synth, and Stevie, got Barry Gordy to buy it for him when he was doing that album, because it was a very expensive album. Stevie was like behind schedule and over budget because he was pulling all the stops. He had a full band. He had the GX1. He had ARPs. He had all kinds of stuff. It was costing. He spent probably like $1 million making the record. I think from the documentary I saw, he spent a lot of money. And part of it was that GX1. And the GX1, I don't think there's more than 10 of them around. I think Yes had one, some other bands had them. It is just a phenomenal synth, and it had that polyphonic aftertouch to give you all that input. It had that sound. If you listen to Saturn, you're like, man, what the heck is that? You really don't hear anything like that again. Even the CS80, which is a great Yamaha synth, it doesn't sound like that. And it was like Vangelis used that on the Terminator soundtrack. So that's another core synth. A lot of synths can be associated with very core sounds, like the ARP 2500. If you've ever watched Close Encounters of the Third Kind and you hear that music they're trying to communicate with the aliens, that's an ARP 2500. So there's very specific capabilities of these synths. They're not all the same. They are very unique. And then people started to learn, it's like, hey, these things are just as unique as a Fender or a Rickenbacker guitar or a Gibson. There's a reason why you would choose an ARP 2500 over ARP 2600 over a Jupiter 8 over an Oberheim OBA. Each of them have a reason why you would use it, because they create different sounds that you could use to serve a song. So I am a big believer in trying to get some of these hardware synths, and I have a lot of hardware synths in my studio because I like the nature of what they really sound like. And I do have, as I indicated at the beginning, the Akai Force, which allows me to be in a modern world of plugins, which are approximations of older instruments. But I still am a big believer in actually having that hardware instrument. That's why I have my Moogs, my Arturias, and my Rolands, because there is a difference that I can hear when you actually have the real instrument. And sometimes you can't afford it. Like I can't afford a Mellotron. I can't get an ARP Odyssey, so I have software implementations of those things. But where I could get Moogs, and I did get them, or in Rolands I did get them, and Arturias I actually went and got them because it is a core thing. I mean, I've always wanted to have a Prophet 5 in my stable because that's a core new wave type of synth. It is something that everybody would want if you're a synth player. Everybody wants an OBA or a Jupiter 8 or any of the great classic synths like a DX7 or a D50 from Roland. There's all these different models, and they all, if you name check them and you're a keyboardist synthesizer player, they'll all know what I'm talking about. They'll all know, it's like just the way a guitar player would know like a Telecaster versus a Stratocaster. They know what they would use it for. It's the same thing with synths. And I always want to give people an appreciation that synths aren't just like, oh, that's new wave and that's not cool. You think about like how Trent Reznor uses a synthesizer. I mean, I saw him at the Woodstock where Green Day was having a mud party. And I saw that, and it was like super powerful. I actually watched somebody using synthesizers in a very aggressive way, very punk, very industrial punk. And it was like, that was a revelation. And a lot of my music is kind of inspired by that kind of attitude. I've always had a punk aesthetic in my music that goes back to a band like The Who, who I think are the first punks, and the next godfather of punk is like Neil Young, Crazy Horse. And then you got, Kurt Cobain and Eddie Vedder with the grunge movement, which is basically continuing what Pete and Neil did. Because Pete Townsend and Neil Young are kind of like the godfathers of punk. They kind of created that idea of having that raucous sound. And you listen to my generation, you listen to early Who. It's very raucous. It's very like on the edge of falling apart. It's very powerful. And there's something about that kind of honesty that when, you see how Trent Reznor applied it to 9 Inch Nails, you got Pretty Hate Machine, that we were kind of happy that one of our songs called Disconnected Youth was reviewed, and it was actually compared to Pretty Hate Machine. And, we weren't trying for that, but Trent is a big inspiration. Pete Townsend is an inspiration. Sunrise is an inspiration. Princeton. The fact that they picked up that's one of our heroes, that was kind of cool. Like if you're a musician and you're like, yeah, I mean, you're not trying to get everybody to think that that's what you're doing, but when somebody kind of finds it or realizes it, it's kind of cool. So we, always had that punk aesthetic in our music, and it's part of the whole idea of expansive sound. That, keyboards don't have to just be pretty. You don't just have to play really pretty chords, like piano chords, or play something that's more like background or atmospheric stuff that's soothing. Sometimes you want to do something discordant or jarring or like distorted. And we can do that. We can actually, my band, if you ever listen to us, a lot of people say, well, who's the guitar player? I like that guitar player. Well, I'm the guitar player because I'm actually channeling guitar through my synthesizer. And people are like, well, how are you doing that? I said, well, the whole point of being a synthesizer player is the fact that we can mimic other instruments. And I've kind of taken that to heart. The whole idea when I got into synthesizers is I wanted to be able to do everything myself. I was a control freak, right? I got sick of waiting for everybody in the band to show up. If people were getting married, people had girlfriends say, hey, stop playing with those guys. It's a pain in the, we don't, that's not going to go anywhere. Just stop. Right? So most people stopped. I kept on going. And then I said, well, I got to learn to be the drummer. I got to learn to be the bass player. I got to learn to be the keyboardist. I got to learn how to do all this stuff. And since I was kind of a control freak, and when I was in the bands I was in, I was like writing all the songs anyway. So I was writing the lyrics, but I wasn't singing, but I was writing everything. So I said, well, you know what? Since I'm already writing everything, I'm just going to learn to play everything. And I really took it to heart. I mean, I read Keyboard Magazine before the internet. I watched lots of videos of tons of bands. And, I went to see a lot of bands, from the Allman Brothers to Funkadelic to The Who to Prince. I mean, it's like I would go see, Grateful Dead. I just wanted to see really good musicians. And REM replacements, tons of stuff. My taste is all over the map. Sonic Youth. But I basically started to say, hey, I can use these synthesizers the way I started reading that what the point was is that you could become that other instrument. And some of these synthesizers actually have behaviors that allow you to mimic. Like the Roland I use for my guitar is called a Roland Juno GI. And what's cool about it is it's got Boss effect pedals built into the sound design. And what does that mean? Well, Roland and Boss are the same company. And people might not know that, but Boss is a company that's a subdivision of Roland synthesizers out of Japan. And Boss was a company that they spun off that builds effect pedals or stomp boxes for guitarists. And they have famous space echoes, distortion pedals, flangers, all kinds of crazy things, phasers. And guitar players would know what I'm talking about. These are effect pedals. And synthesizer players for a long time, they used to go get pedals and then apply them to their mini Moog or apply them to their Hammond B3s or even to their electric pianos, and give them an extra oomph. So Roland started to integrate in the Juno. They had a stereo course in the Juno 106, and that was one of their boss effects they incorporated into the sound design. The thing about the Juno GI, they took it even further. They took like all their effect pedals and made like digital versions of them in the workflow. And then within that synth, there's like a bunch of guitars that they have with this idea called supernatural sound. And the guitar implementation on the keyboard is that like different playing techniques bring out actual real aspects of playing guitar, especially electric guitar, even 12-string guitar and acoustic guitars. But electric guitar is really implemented well on the Juno GI because it's got the distortion pedals in the workflow. So it got phasers and distortion all like layered on each other. You can go into the sound design part of the synth and you can actually see all these layers and structures of how the pedals can be attached to the sound and how you can adjust it. So I said, wow, I'm going to go double down on that. And the other piece I did is I took a Moog, my analog Moogs, and I bring an analog signal into the path and bring it into the Juno to give it a little more realism by having that analog come in and parallel to the digital signal. There's an analog signal, and so that gives it even more like authenticity because it's like this more organic thing. So when I bring that, and I already have the behavior that's built into this Juno with all these distortion pedals already built into the sound, I can actually play like a guitar player, doing feedback and pitch bends, and modulation, harmonics, all kinds of stuff. And over time, I've learned how to actually, play chords the way a guitar player would play chords, not the way a keyboard player would play chords. Play leads the way a lead guitar player would play it. And so I have in my catalog a bunch of songs that people like think there's a guitar player, but it's actually me. And when I went to New York and played a bunch of shows in 2017, people were like, that keyboard's like sounded like a guitar. How are you doing that? And I was like, well, because I doubled down on it. A lot of people look at that capability in these synths and they're like, well, I already have a guitar player, so I'm not going to do it. So a lot of times people don't use it. And I found like, well, this feature is here, and I hardly ever hear anybody using it because they always feel like, well, if I already got a guitar player, why would I do that? It's going to offend them or people aren't going to like it. But because the Ghost Weed, it's all me, and I didn't have a guitar player, and so I needed to channel that guitar. So what's wrong with me doing that? And so it ends up having this capability you really don't see a lot of people using. And so it became like a big part of my sound. Because even to this day, most people won't use it because they would just go and have a regular guitar player. Now, I'm sure, like if I went on the road, and I got a full band, I might be in a situation where I want to use a guitar player, but I think I probably wouldn't because I was like, point of my sound is the fact that I can actually channel a guitar on the keyboard. And that's kind of like the selling point of the band. And the fact that I can actually do it and people see me actually do it is what's interesting when people see me. So I don't, and I actually played with having a guitar player, but what we ended up doing is like we both played guitar. I did my part and he added an additional part. So we didn't have him just take over. We just ended up rewriting some of the songs that have dual parts. And then we kind of played a duel, and we thought that was cool. And so that was really cool. And I was a nod out to Eric, who was part of Ghost for a while in 2017. And when we had Eric, he did some really interesting things. And we played live in New York a couple times. And people were very impressed at the fact that we could do like a twin guitar sound with just one guitar player and a keyboard player. So you can always do things that people tell you not to do, because I think that's how you progress in music. You just if you just do what everybody tells you is the right thing, then it's going to be boring. So that's why I always try to push it. But this is Phantom Electric Ghost signing off again. If you check out familylikeghost.com for all things Expansive Sound. We got a landing page on the right at the beginning of our site for Peg Forever. It is kind of a raucous album. It's got adult content. If you're not into that, don't get upset. We would say that if you like Prince, you know he has Purple Rain, you know he has Dirty Mind. We kind of swing a little bit toward the Dirty Mind kind of period. If you're not into that, then you won't like us, so don't get upset. So, yeah, everybody has freedom to create the way they want to. So I'll talk to you later. Fam Electric Ghost. Check us out on our website, and we'll talk to you later.
Be sure to support and sign up for registration to the MATC conference and support men's mental health needs. Go to www.matcconference.com and sign up to be a part of this conference that talks about the kind of taboo subject of men's mental health and puts it out there in a real clear way to get it more light of day. So go out again to www.matcconference.com and register today. This is Fam Electric Ghost, and Newsly is an audio app for iOS and Android. It picks up web articles about the most trending topics on the web at any given moment and reads them to you in a natural human voice. So for the first time in history on the net, the web becomes listenable. Browse articles from topics you choose and start playing, stop scrolling, start listening. They have podcasts as well, so explore trending podcasts from over 40 countries. Our podcast, the Fam Electric Ghost podcast, is on there too, so download and use Newsly for free now from www.newsly.me. So that's www.newsly.me, and that's NEWSLY.me. And so use the promo code GHOST2021 and receive a 1 month free premium subscription. So that's a pretty cool deal. So all you got to do is use Ghost 2021 and you get a 1 month free premium subscription to Newsly. Check it out. You'll like it. I listen to it every day and it's really great. Thank you. And keep on listening to Peg and everything else on Anchor FM and Spotify podcast. Thank you.